Welcome to today's episode of the Back in Shape podcast. Today we're going to be talking about how you should be training your core in order to rehabilitate effectively if you have lower back pain, how you can strengthen your core effectively, and really address some simple misconceptions or a fundamental misconception around core training and what it should involve. Hopefully, this is going to give you guys a good understanding of what you should be doing and where that misconception has led people astray to doing exercises which fundamentally, well, we won't get into it on this podcast, but are the wrong sort of exercises if we've got back pain, and secondarily are exercises that are inferior for building real world strength and resilience, unless of course you are some sort of bodybuilder who is trying to sculpt certain specific areas for a show and you're down at 5% body fat. We know that most of you guys watching our podcast are not in that category, so you can dismiss much of that side of things as you are going forwards to really get the most out of building your core for the long term and for your back health. Because at the end of the day, why are we training our core? Not to have a strong core, but we're training our core so that our back is healed properly, maybe from a previous injury, and so that it can be resilient for the long term. So more importantly, we can do the things that we want to do with the people we care about without having our back constantly getting in the way and being a feature that limits our ability to participate in those sorts of activities. So I thought, as always, if you are watching this on the website or one of the other platforms, there's normally a comment section underneath here. So if you've got any questions about this, please do share those in the comments below. We read and reply to all of your comments on the various platforms. So that's there for you to ask any questions. Things are perhaps unclear as part of this podcast. As always, we can't always cover every single facet of this. So your questions on things perhaps are left outstanding can really help us give you guys a little bit of extra help and support on the relevant topic. So first things first, I think understanding what the core specifically is a helpful way to go about this, because we think often the core is, oh, well, it's the six pack, and maybe if we've got a more detailed understanding, maybe it's the transverse abdominis muscle, maybe it's the obliques, etc. But the core really is the central region. It is a cylinder of musculature and fibrous tissue that goes around a central strut, the spine. We have the rib cage on top, a large body of mass, and we have the pelvis on the bottom. You can see just over my shoulder here, if you're watching, another large body of mass attached to the real power generators of the body, the glutes, etc. But in the middle, we've got this spine, this structure, and we're assuming for the moment that you haven't got an injury in the back. We'll touch on that a little bit later on. We've got this central spine through the middle. And this cylinder of muscle is not just the obliques, the transverse abdominis, the six-pack, rectus abdominis. We've also got the thoracolumbar fascia there. That's going to be connecting a lot of these muscles on the back. And that's also going to connect musculature above the core region and below the core region as well to provide tension and stability. We've then got the erector spinae muscles running along the back. We've got the muscles like the QL just off to the side there. We've then also got muscles like the lat, a large sheet of muscle that's going to run across the back and come up round to the shoulder, as well as muscles like the psoas, which is attaching on the front of the spine, delving down and through into the hips. So you can see that there is this web of musculature that supports the core region. And that is so important to think about when we're thinking about what the core is supposed to be doing and our core training. It's not just some simple muscles that hold everything together in the middle. It is a symphony of different muscles all playing their part in a dynamic way in the real world. Granted, if you're just doing some hanging leg raises or you're doing some sit-ups, it's very, very mundane and very simple. But the way in which we function and are expected to function in the real world starts to reveal the way in which all of these muscles have to interplay with one another. If we take a step moving on to actual back pain, if you have an injury in that central strut that is supporting your spine, maybe you've got sciatica, maybe you've got just some low-grade lower back pain, you then have that symphony that was going on. It's like someone's come along and they've got a cymbal and they're just banging that thing away because maybe the lumbar erector spinae muscles are just not taking their fair share. Maybe your hamstrings are just not contributing effectively to the whole system of transferring force up and down the spine and through that core region. And that can really throw things. And that's why when you think about core strengthening, core training, we want to sometimes start from a simpler place. And we'll get into some steps that we can take going forwards. But understand that it is all of these muscles working together that provide that core stability. And sometimes it's going to be the leg muscles are nice and statically held. They're in a state of what's called isometric contraction. An isometric contraction would be like a plank. You just hold everything still. Other times you might have those muscles are actually moving and other muscles need to be solid and held steady. For example, if we're walking around, if we're about to lift something, we might have our trunk muscles, some of those core muscles that we've mentioned, and some of the lower back muscles, and some of the muscles coming higher up through into the back, the erector spinae muscles as they come up the back. They're nice and stable and solid. And then our glutes are driving, using the tension in the thoracolumbar fascia to support this whole process as well, are driving us from a low position to a high position as we carry something. The whole system works in such an integrated way, and it requires you to have the ability to engage and provide stability at the level of the trunk. Just think about it. If, let's say, you were doing a squat or carrying a heavy bag, if you did not, as you were going to put that bag onto the table, if you did not provide stability at the level of the core, as you go to drive up through the legs, your whole body would fishhook over because you have no integrity. There is no strong base for those muscles to act upon. So the core region, if we will, that central region between the rib cage at top and the pelvis at the bottom, is there to provide a static base point off which the muscles of the lower leg and the muscles of the lower body, the legs, and the muscles of the upper body can act as at least one end of them is hooked in. For example, if we do a press up, as we press down, the ground is the solid part and our body moves up, but our torso is held steady and our shoulder is the thing that moves. So some muscles are going to be held stable, some features, the ground, are going to be stable, and other areas, the muscles are going to be contracting to move. And this is how it works in our lower back as well. So we want to start off with a position of developing stability. And if we've got a back injury, we want to start it in the safest possible way. And that's why many of the exercises that you guys do, if you're with us in the Back in Shape program, phase 1, phase 2, you're doing them on the floor. We've removed the complication of gravity, where if things go awry, we can get into a lot of trouble, we can hurt ourselves. And we're starting to learn to provide stability to the spine when we're lying down, and then getting certain other limbs to engage other muscles and make sure that that spine can still be held steady. We can still have integrity. We can still have a degree of tension through that system around the trunk or the spine in the abdomen, so that the spine is not pulled awry and into different areas. It is that spine being pulled off center without controlling and holding it steady in the middle. That is what causes many of these instances of lower back pain. You've gone to perhaps put your socks on in the morning, you've twisted the spine has moved. It moved and became injured. It did not stay still and became injured. That's the real key here. We maybe lifted a heavy weight and the spine moved and it became injured. It didn't become injured being still. So learning to provide a bit of stability back to the spine is vital. And doing that off-weight bearing is really, really important. And starting to feed in some elements of something moving while still holding everything still. Then we can start to make the steps to make things a little bit more true to real life, because we want to put you upright so that your core can now have to negotiate not only a movement, maybe a moving limb, maybe an off-center body mass in the example of, let's say, a lunge. As you lunge or go up a step in the house, your core has to hold everything steady and then negotiate with your leg muscle as you shift your body weight onto one leg and off the other. We now have a propensity to have an imbalance and everything to flow off kilt. So our core must work with the one leg's musculature to hold everything steady, and with our torso higher up to make sure that we don't fall off balance here either. We see as we get older, we tend to lose some of these skills, and it's fundamental balance, but it requires strength to have the balance. Otherwise, you can try and balance, but you don't have the muscles that are strong enough to actually deal with the challenges that are there. And as we're going through that lunge, our leg muscles, whether it's up the stair or whether it's a lunge exercise, our leg muscles are working in tandem with the core, in tandem with other muscles in higher at the back to provide stability. And that step 2 is where we are making these exercises true to life. If we compare that again to an abdominal crunch or leg raise, when in real life is your core, your six-pack really, working in such a myopic manner, going straight forwards and down? Sure, if you want to aggressively bend down to tie your shoelaces, or you want to quickly rock up out of bed, yes, maybe there's some utility there, ignoring the fact that that sort of movement is not ideal if you have a lower back injury, and we get to that in other episodes of the podcast, so we won't address that here. But these sorts of ways of training that we're discussing, as opposed to trying to do core training by just doing endless sit-ups or crunches or whatever, is so much more true to the way the lower back works, the way the core works to provide stability for the lower back, and ultimately moves you towards that goal, as we mentioned at the very start of the podcast, to providing your back with resilience for the long term, so you can do the things you want, not just chiseling out those six-pack muscles, because most of that anyway is going to be done by diet, and we can get into that again on another podcast. So we're starting to make things more true to life. Now, before we get into the third step, one of the big misconceptions here is that you can't build a strong core if you're not doing core exercises. And there's such a real stigma around what constitutes an actual core exercise. A core exercise is any exercise that challenges those muscles to maintain neutral, but we think of them so much as something like a crunch, something like a leg raise, something like a abdominal oblique bend to the side. Those exercises, yes, they are there, but they are not going to be, one, as we've mentioned already, applicable to the challenges that your body faces on a daily basis in any real way. And secondarily, you're not going to be able to challenge yourself with those sorts of exercises to the same degree, as we'll get onto in a moment, on something like a split squat. So a split squat is an example of maybe a more advanced lunge, whereby we're stood on one leg, we've got our torso, so we've got that balance issue, and our core's having to work hard there. Now let's say we put 5, 10, 50, 100 pounds on one shoulder or on a barbell. You don't have to go this far, but I'm using it as an example. The firing of your core under those circumstances, doing that exercise that is going to benefit you because it's true to real life, is orders of magnitude greater than you going over to the cable machine, putting the full stack on, maybe it's 50, 60 kilos, and just crunching down using your six-pack. It's just not the same in terms of the quality, the sophistication of movement, and the applicability to the way in which your body is going to have to work on a daily basis. So as long as you're doing an appropriate degree of strength training going forwards, you're meeting step number 3. Step number 3 is starting to progress under load the resistances that you're using on exercises like a split squat, where maybe the balance is off, so your core is having to work really hard as you increase the weight and resistance. Maybe something like a simple squat, even a basic squat, you're going to have to work as you negotiate the leg muscles working together, as you negotiate your balance, as you move through the squatting motion. You can always change these up a little bit by using kettlebells and holding on one side versus the other. And that's going to really challenge the core region in general to push things up a notch in terms of stimulation as we increase the load. But these are compound movements that are true to real life. Everyone's going to do them. They're essential that we must be able to competently do them for our back to be safe, secure, resilient for the long term. And they're infinitely more applicable than, quite frankly, at that stage, silly core exercises that just don't have any applicability to real life and are repetitive, if anything else, just creating forward bending and crunching that core through leg raises and crunches, which are often the common ones. Quite equally so, we might do things like dead bugs in the stage 1 off weight bearing exercises. But those have a place at the right time, but they are not going to be infinitely scalable. You have to use certain tools like the off-weight bearing core exercises when they are applicable, but you also need to know when to move on to these load-bearing activities, because the off-weight bearing core exercise is missing out on a central component, and that is when you're strengthening your core, you're strengthening the entire region. That also includes the spine itself. And you must have that element of load going through your spine, through your core, in an upright manner to help guide the recovery, the healing, the strengthening process of some of the slower structures, the ligaments, the discs, etc. in that region, to help them understand that they need to be stronger. Not just the muscles around the body, but the spine itself, the hips, the knees, the ankles. Having that load is essential to completing a more holistic view of what makes up your core and your core strength and resilience. So by just doing simple traditional core exercises, we are missing that central strut, so to speak, the spine through the middle, and its ability to be stimulated through the load-bearing activities in a dynamic way that has a number of benefits. Firstly, it builds resilience through the central strut and the spine. It also obviously challenges the muscles in ways that you won't do with other exercises, both from a strength point of view. So, for example, we discussed squats, we've discussed hip hinges, we've discussed split squats as well. But also from a balance point of view. Balance is so important as we get older, as we've discussed already. You're going to improve the balance. And also when you're doing these sorts of exercises, they are physically demanding. You're going to recomposition if you've been doing them for any length of time and not being completely negligent with your diet. You're going to look better, you're going to feel better, you're going to have better energy levels, you're going to have increased muscle tissue as well, which is all productive and healthy. And there are a myriad of benefits that go alongside having that extra conditioning that goes far beyond just your back health, your back resilience, and your back getting better. It's going to improve your hip health. It's going to improve your knee health, your ankle health, your cardiovascular system, your resilience to things like diabetes, heart disease, etc. There are so many benefits if we do these things in the right way. And just to take a step back, say, well, I know that a split squat isn't, I've never thought of it as a core exercise, but actually, maybe it really is. So hopefully in closing, this episode of the podcast has made you reevaluate what would constitute a core exercise. Yes, the traditional view of core exercises or specific choice ones, ignoring others, as we've mentioned already, are going to be appropriate when you're in the early stages of recovering from back pain. And they are going to help you build the foundations of spine stability and the ability to maintain stability when we are pulled off balance. But then we must graduate to doing things upright and then further with load to allow our core to really become stronger in the most holistic way, leaving no gaps and making sure that that is fundamentally applicable to the challenges, stresses, and strains that our body is going to be under on a daily basis. Hopefully this has made you really think. And if you've got any questions, you know what to do in the comment section below. If you did find this video helpful, let us know. Give us a thumbs up if you're watching on one of the relevant platforms. Share this with someone else who's maybe struggling with their back pain. And if you are someone who's maybe struggled with back pain in the past, or maybe has an episode right now and you need a little bit of help, consider learning a little bit more about the full program and the premium membership, because that is exactly what you need to really build resilience for the long term in your lower back and the body at large. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next episode of the podcast.